Before I say anything, I would like to violate the rule that I was told to abide by and acknowledge the presence of an extraordinary public servant, my friend and yours, Walter Mondale. All of his life, Fritz Mondale has served America with distinction in the Army, as Minnesota's Attorney General, and as United States Senator from the great state of Minnesota, as our ambassador to Japan, and as Vice President of the United States. We are very lucky to have with us someone who represents the gold standard of American politics. And it's especially a great honor to have him here as we honor and remember Hubert Humphrey, Fritz's dear friend and colleague of 3 decades, whom he first met and joined forces with when Fritz was only 19 years of age. The second person I want to mention is one of my dearest friends in my whole lifetime, and that is another Minnesotan, James Johnson, who is here tonight. He has distinguished himself in government service with Senator Mondale and Vice President Mondale. He was the president and CEO of Fannie Mae and is the lead director at Target. Jim and I play golf almost weekly, and I lose to him weekly. Every time Jim Johnson and I play golf, I demonstrate the theory that not all black people excel in athletics. And it was especially moving to come to this building and go with my friend Jim Johnson to the A.I. Johnson Great Room, which is a tribute to his father, who was a formidable politician in Minnesota as Speaker of the House and as a member of the Board of Regents of this university. I loved, admired, and greatly respected Hubert Humphrey. So I am honored to be here at the Humphrey School and at the university which has a dormitory named for my dear friend, my former boss and mentor, the past head of the NAACP, Roy Wilkins. Sometime in the 1970s, mid-70s, sometime in the 70s, I was here in my capacity as head of the National Urban League, and I came here to speak at the Minneapolis Urban League Equal Opportunity Day dinner. And Hubert Humphrey and I were seated next to each other on the dais, awaiting our turn to speak. And Humphrey leans over to me and he says, "Vernon, how long is your speech?" And I said, it's about 15 minutes. He said, you know, you're in Minnesota. That's not long enough. And so I said, what do you mean? He said, I'll explain it to you. He said, in 1960, in the Democratic primary in West Virginia, I lost to John Kennedy. And so being a good Democrat, I invited him to come to Minneapolis and speak to all of the former labor Democrats, whatever y'all call it. And he said, everybody came from all over the state. And it was the same room where we both were that night, and he said it was packed. He said, Vernon, can you believe that John Kennedy got up and spoke to that crowd of Minnesotans for exactly 10 minutes? And you could see the disappointment written all over their faces. And so I said, well, what happened? He said, I got up and spoke for 45 minutes. The truth is, I can't speak long enough to fully capture Hubert Humphrey's legacy. Nobody, not even Humphrey himself, really could. But the first thing I'll say that it's a special privilege to be here tonight and to join my fellow honorees in receiving this award. And I thank you for this award, and I accept it on behalf of the many individuals and institutions that have made my journey possible. That journey began in 1943 when I was 8 years old. There was a gubernatorial race in Georgia, my home state, where then Governor Eugene Talmadge was being challenged by a young lawyer named Ellis Arnold. And I'm sitting in our apartment in the first public housing project built for black people in America. And Governor Talmadge comes on WSB radio, and he says, fellow Georgians, this is your Governor, Eugene Talmadge, and I am running for re-election as your governor. And I have 2 planks in my platform, niggers and roads. I'm against the first, and I'm for the second. That was my introduction to American politics. But 5 years later, I was introduced to a different side of American politics. I was 13 years old watching the 1948 Democratic Convention with my father, and I watched as a young man, a young white man, strode to the podium. And I watched as he declared, just a few miles from the hall where the Constitution was first signed. And he said, to those who say that we are rushing this issue of civil rights, I say to them, we are 172 years late. The time has arrived in America for the Democratic Party to get out of the shadow of states' rights and to walk forthrightly into the bright sunshine of human rights. That was my introduction to Hubert H. Humphrey. I did not yet know that Humphrey Humphrey, upon encountering separate white and colored facilities as a graduate student at Louisiana State University, first pronounced Jim Crow uneconomical before swiftly concluding that it was also unjust, unconscionable, and unacceptable. I did not know that as mayor, he had rammed through the first municipal Fair Employment Practices Commission in the country, not because blacks constituted a powerful voting bloc in Minneapolis, but because it was the right thing to do. I did not know that Humphrey spent 2 days and nights during the 1948 convention arguing the moral and political case for civil rights with such passion and intensity that he would lose 18 pounds in just a few short days. I did not know that when a 7-year-old girl wrote to him saying, "I don't understand why the white people don't like the black people," Humphrey took time to reply, and he wrote, "There is no good reason why people should hate one another because of the color of their skin. Unfortunately, adults are plagued with ailments that rarely touch children. They are much more serious than measles or chickenpox, and they are known as bad habits, prejudice, and fear. For recovery, the best medicine I know is good law, good judgment, and good manners." I didn't know that years later, when the former vice president no longer had the car and driver that were the perks of his office, Humphrey would take taxis around town, and D.C. cab drivers, then almost all of them black, would refuse his money when he got ready to pay for the ride, telling him, "Mr. Humphrey, you've already paid." One man said, "You've been paying for this ride since 1948. And I certainly had no idea that our lives would intersect, mine and Hubert's. But over the course of serving on Johnson presidential commissions, I had the great privilege of coming to know Hubert Humphrey, and he was quite a man. I remember in 1971, I got a call from Hubert Humphrey. He said, "Vernon, I'm going to be at the Waldorf, and I want you to come to see me at 4 o'clock. And I said, "Okay." And so I visited him in his hotel suite. We sat out on the sofa, eating and drinking his favorite saltine crackers with cheese and beer. And we got through the preliminaries, how the kids, thus and so, how's it going? And so I finally said, "Hey, Mr. Vice President, what's on your mind?" And he said, "Well, Vernon, I'm thinking of running again for president, and I'd like your thoughts on whether I should do that." And so I said, "Mr. Vice President, I anticipated that that's what was on your mind, and I've done some thinking." And so I laid out my logic, my rationale, and concluded, "Hubert Humphrey, I don't think you should run in 1972. And Humphrey jumped up off of that sofa, and he put his 2 fingers in front of my face, and he said, "Vernon Jordan, don't you understand? I came this close to hail to the chief. Don't be logical with me. Don't be rational with me. I came this close to hail to the chief. And I ran back and I said, run, Humphrey. Run, Humphrey. Of course, 1972 was not Humphrey's year any more than 1968 was his year. But I wholeheartedly agree with President Carter, who once sent Humphrey a photo of the two of them behind the Oval Office desk. Carter inscribed it, "Hubert Humphrey, this desk should have been yours." And yet, even though he never became president, Hubert Humphrey had an impact as great, if not greater, than many who did sit behind that desk. I stand here today mindful that next week marks the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. 50 years since President Johnson affixed his signature to that landmark piece of legislation and handed one of the pens to one of the law's greatest and most eloquent champions, Hubert Humphrey. So on the anniversary of his greatest accomplishment, we can remember Humphrey's courage, his compassion, his vision. But as we look at America in this young century, we must also ask the question, how would Humphrey react to America today? I think Humphrey would shed tears of joy to see Barack Obama in the Oval Office, even if it would make him a tad jealous. He would be so proud that it was the work of so many men and women of every race that put President Barack Obama in the White House 2 times. But I think Humphrey would shed tears of joy, sorrow, to see Jim Crow reborn, not just in the South, but across America, as a surge of draconian new voter identification laws are proposed and enacted in the states. Though thankfully, the people of Minnesota, thanks to the leadership of one of the honorees here tonight, had the good sense to vote down such a law in 2012. I think Humphrey would shed tears of joy to see black CEOs at America's top companies, titans of the corporate world like Kenneth Chenault of American Express, Ursula Burns of Xerox, Roger Ferguson of TIAA Kraft, Kenneth Frazier of Merck, and Don Thompson of McDonald's. At the same time, I think he would shed tears of sorrow to see the toll that poverty and hunger and hopelessness are having on too many Americans, black and white. What joy to see urban violence dropping, but what sorrow that weapons of war continue to be wielded on our streets and in our schools. So there would be tears of joy, and there would be tears of sorrow, but there would not be resignation, for Hubert Humphrey would care far less about an airport terminal or even a policy school named for him than he would care about the millions still left behind. So Humphrey would say to us, we must fight on, for it is the journey of the promised land to the promised land, not the promised land itself, that will define a people and the nation. That was his special ability. He never left the fight, never once veered from his commitment to equal rights, even as he became more adept at working within the system to achieve those ends. He was an agent of change who intuitively understood, as Martin King said, that change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability. He knew we had to be relentless in agitating for progress. And so he, Hubert Humphrey, he went with us, stood by us, and propped us up on every weak and leaning side. Today, more than ever, we need Hubert Humphrey's unwavering spirit and clarion conscience, because injustice in our country in this day may be less visible than it was when I was growing up in segregated Atlanta and Hubert Humphrey walked the halls of Congress. Injustice is no longer men and women and children turned upon with dogs and fire hoses, but the pernicious dynamics of history do not disappear that neatly. It happens when young people and minorities are denied the ballot from Texas to South Carolina to Wisconsin to Ohio. It happens when people with Hispanic last names are subject to search and suspicion on the assumption that they are illegal immigrants. It happens when foreclosure notices are processed without due process, driving families out of their homes as quickly as unscrupulous lenders drove them into their homes. Today, the oppression of the powerless happens inside the walls of power. It is insidious because it is invisible, and those of us who have been ushered behind those walls have, in my view, a special responsibility, indeed a sacred obligation, to live our lives with open eyes, with eyes open to injustice, and to use our positions to combat it. Because when we do, we inch ever closer to meeting what Hubert Humphrey so eloquently called the moral test of government, how it treats those who are in the dawn of life, the children, those who are in the twilight of life, the aged, and those who are in the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the handicapped. And so as I take my seat, I offer you one last illustration as a testament to my enduring belief in the power of people and nations to meet Hubert Humphrey's moral test. In May of 1980, I was shot in the back, returning to my hotel in Fort Wayne, Indiana. When I came out of the operating room after surgery that saved my life, one of the many wires and telegrams that came to my hospital room, one of them came from Montgomery, Alabama. It read, "I was shocked and saddened to learn of your injury. I am praying for your complete recovery, and I am thankful that your life was spared." That wire was signed George C. Wallace, Governor of Alabama. Now, I fought with George Wallace as a young lawyer in Atlanta, and what he stood for from the day he defied the law and morality by trying to deny black people their rights under the United States Constitution. But I appreciated that wire, for it said to me that political differences must be subordinated to common humanity. It said to me that we are all human beings who have to reach out to each other. It said to me that Governor Wallace, too, knew what it was like to feel the pain of a would-be assassin's bullet. The story does not end there. 2 years later, I went to Montgomery, Alabama to celebrate the retirement of a civil rights champion, E.D. Nixon, the first person that Rosa Parks called when she was arrested. 5 minutes before the program started at the George Washington Carver High School in Montgomery, state troopers wheeled Governor George Wallace into the school auditorium. And during my remarks, there were some policies of Wallace's that I had criticized. But at the end of the program, Wallace directed the state troopers to put his wheelchair up on the stage and roll him toward me. When he reached me, he said, "Vernon, you got my telegram. You said so in your speech." And I said, "Governor, it was the first telegram that I got in Fort Wayne." Now, I was standing up, and Governor Wallace was sitting in his wheelchair. And he said to me, "Vernon, you were shot a lot worse than me. But I understand that you play tennis and golf and that you go around doing what you want to do, but here am I sitting in this damn wheelchair." And then he said, "Vernon, I want you to do something for me, if you will." I said, "What is it, Governor?" And George C. Wallace, the man who proclaimed segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, said to me, "Vernon, will you reach down and hug me?" That's the absolute, God's honest truth. Hubert Humphrey's 1968 Dixiecrat opponent, a mean old racist who once stood in the schoolhouse door to keep black people out, could no longer stand at all. Yet he wished he could stand, not to set himself defiantly athwart history, but rather to embrace me as a brother. As much as anything, that kind of transformation, repeated 1,000,000 times over, is the lasting legacy of Hubert Humphrey and public servants like him. And if we followed the path Hubert Humphrey showed us, if we relentlessly confront the injustices of our own time, I am absolutely confident we can meet Humphrey's moral test and walk still further into the bright sunshine of human rights and a new day. Thank you very much.